All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to the Gunner Technology Livestream, a weekly tech talk for non-techies and techies alike. I'm your host, Darren Merkins. With me is CEO of Gunner Technology, Cody Swan. What's up, Cody?
Not much. I'm just working on my fat Thor body today, which
You
people
know
are
what?
up in arms about, man. They are up in arms about that.
The internet in general.
I don't know
They're
about
up
the
in
internet in
fat arms
general,
about that.
but there's a portion of the internet that is up in arms about fat Thor.
There's a portion of the internet that's up in arms about anything in the world, ever.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. I don't know how you make a generally available anything these days because there's
I don't think there's
nothing that's
such
ever
thing
going
as
to be more
generally
received.
available thing. I guess we should have said spoilers. Spoilers. There's a fat Thor. I was gonna
Oh,
say I can't believe it's
I said
already
I said fat sore. Fat sore. That's what I meant to say. Not fat.
fat sore. Oh, okay. So no spoilers.
Yeah.
Um, I guess we can dive right into it. This is the first episode of May 2019. I can't believe that it's already May. This year has absolutely disappeared.
Yeah. Yep.
But
It's going by quick.
actually, you know what? Talk for a second because I got to grab my other computer to look up who won the Country Store giveaway.
Okay.
So talk sort of focuses on you. Just talk
Yeah.
about fat
So
sword.
I'll talk about fat sore. No, this was in reference to Marvel Endgame. In case someone out there hasn't seen it yet, and Thor goes through a bout of depression, and I'm not going to give away really spoilers, but in his depression, he lets himself go and he gets overweight, which is, I took it as a relatable thing for a demigod to go through to relate to human beings. But apparently, people are really offended that it was a kind of a fat joke, I guess, somehow.
Kind of. I mean, I don't know if you said this, but he failed miserably in Infinity
Yeah,
War.
yeah,
I
yep.
mean,
And
that
he
would
went.
wreck anyone. He basically let half the universe die. Spoilers if you haven't seen Infinity War.
So yeah, he was. As I was saying, he was deeply depressed and kind of let himself go. I mean, I guess that's offensive to the people who let themselves go. I guess I don't know.
I'm offended by everything, so I found it incredibly offensive.
I'm offended by the people who find it offensive.
I'm going to post about it on my Tumblr. All right, so let's dive right into it. The winner of this week's Country Store giveaway. Country Store is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. You can visit them at countrystoreoutfitters.com. This is actually from our old neck of the woods, John E. from New Haven, Connecticut. I haven't been back to Connecticut in forever. Not since
No.
probably our last ESPN offsite.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? So I went back there after that. For some reason I went back there and they were like moving everyone. And I don't even know why I was back there because I was like quitting in like 2 days or something like that. And yet they still flew me back there to do something. I don't know what it was. But yeah, that was my last time in Connecticut.
Probably go through more HR training.
Maybe that was it. Maybe that was mandatory training, and I was like, this is my last day, and they're like, yeah,
you still gotta do it. That's the thing. So, John, you've got a Country Store hat heading your way along with copies of our ebooks. And for anyone who didn't win this week, hop on our Facebook page and sign up for the Country Store giveaway. And while you're there, go ahead and answer our question of the week, which this past week was, have you read a physical newspaper in the past month? And honestly, I was surprised that anyone said they had read a physical newspaper in the past month, but we got a couple folks. Mostly no, though. Physical newspapers, I don't even know. I guess it was kind of a topical question because ESPN the magazine just announced that they are shutting down their physical distribution of the magazine and going fully digital. And I can't imagine physical journalism, newspapers, magazines, other than maybe the trash at the checkout at grocery stores, because that seems to sell pretty well.
Yeah, and I was wondering if like they read it while they were like whacking their dogs like with a rolled up newspaper. Like that's the
or when they're lining their bird cage.
that's the big loss of the hard copy newspaper is what are you going to roll up or like discipline your dog with these days?
Or run out of bubble wrap and you stuff the box full of newspaper.
And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of angry tweets from disciplined dogs out there for offending them.
Oh, Pete is going to be all over us. So the question of the week this week coming up, which you can answer on our Facebook page. And this was in the news recently. And I couldn't believe it, but Pokemon Go apparently is as popular now. as popular now, almost as popular now as it was when it first launched.
Oh my God.
And that was 5 years ago. Somehow there's been a resurgence in Pokemon Go. I think they're doing more events and they're releasing more like Pokemon Go specific Pokemon that people are going to catch. I think they
And,
just released some of those or something like that.
and isn't there a Pikachu movie coming out?
There is Detective Pikachu. That's right. I bet that's a huge bump for them.
Yeah,
I think that's coming out in like a month.
Ryan
Ryan
Reynolds.
Reynolds is the voice of Pikachu. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's a great call. I didn't even think of that.
Is Ash Ketchum going to be in it?
Yeah, I think he's the kid from, or it might not be Ash Ketchum. The kid from Jurassic World. Like the nerdy kid in Jurassic World. I think is going to be the Pokemon catcher guy. He might be Ash Ketchum. He might not be. But anyways, the question of the week this week is: have you ever played Pokemon Go?
I have not. I have not played.
I haven't either.
I certainly played all of the colors on Game Boy and Game Boy Advance, and then what was that? Pokemon Stadium on N64. Was that what it was called?
I think the best Pokemon game ever created is Pokemon Snap. I don't know if you ever played that.
No, what was that? What platform?
You have to go around and you have to take pictures of Pokemon. So there's levels where you have to get like the perfect picture, and it was the most addictive game because you wanted to have, I forget what that top level was, but the top level picture of every Pokemon, and you would get so close, and you had stuff you could like throw them apples to make them dance and stuff. So you had to get them in like particular positions, and like the more of the Pokemon you had on screen, the more points you got. So that was a hyper addictive game, and it's awesome too.
And if you lost, you would like slip into a Fat Thor depression.
Oh my gosh, so much Fat Thor depression from that game. Because you had to redo the whole level too. I mean, if anything would make you become a Fat Thor is Pokemon Snap. But if you've ever played Pokemon Go, or if you haven't, hop on our Facebook page and let us know. There's also a Harry Potter Pokemon or a Harry Potter like VR app coming out soon, where I guess you go around and collect magical creatures or maybe wizards, maybe just capture wizards.
Speaking of VR, is it VR or is it AR?
Oh, sorry, AR.
Okay,
I said VR, I meant AR.
Right. So speaking of AR, I saw something that that summed up perfectly like where we are as a society. People were going nuts about finally finding a good use for AR, like a business value for AR, and then it was going to change everything. And it basically what it was like a Foot Locker type app where you could point your phone camera at your feet, and you could see what the shoes look like.
Oh, good Lord.
And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, not since I was like 10 have I wanted a pair of shoes based on how they would look on me. Like, I mean, clearly with AR, you have no idea how they feel on your foot or like if they actually fit and can you walk in them. Now,
that's the number one priority for me for shoes is can you walk in them.
Right. But these people were just, I mean, it was like they discovered the wheel. I was just,
that's a game changer right there.
This is where we are in society, where like fashion is the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 priority.
I will say though,
purchasing decision. People
love shoes when they release new shoes. Like they always release like special athlete shoes, and the line at Foot Locker at the mall near me is like thousands of people long to buy these new athlete shoes.
I mean,
I think they're almost like an investment now.
It's crazy. Don't get me wrong. I used to need the latest and greatest shoe when I was a teenager.
That's embarrassing.
But yeah, that is embarrassing. But like, you're right. Like, I mean, there are people like grown ass men like spending $400 on like special edition shoes, and by special edition I mean they have like a blue speck on them that the normal ones don't have.
Worth it.
Yeah. Totally.
Wow. Yeah, so keep an eye out for that exciting new AR shoe trier honor app. That's gonna change the world. And hop on our Facebook page and answer the question of the week. But I guess we can dive into this week's episode. We talked a little bit about some similar topics, but it's going to be slightly different. Last week, we talked about deploying to staging, and we talked about what the different environments are. This week, we're going to be talking about not only deploying to production, but what the production environment, the purpose of the production environment is, how the production environment is set up, how it differs from the other environments. So I guess just in terms of a jumping off point, maybe compare production to staging. What are the differences between the two?
Okay, so in a traditional infrastructure environment, the production server is much more robust, meaning staging, like we talked about last week, is generally where you do tests. So you don't need to have like a huge array of servers or like a, like a 8 gigabyte or like 16 gigabytes of RAM on your database server, or 400 gigabytes of available hard drive space on your database server. You basically just needed servers that would allow you to test, because only like two people would be using it at a single time. Production is where kind of like the real world uses your application. It's like what consumers end up using, and so it had to be much more robust. So you'd have like 16 servers instead of one. You'd have a much more stout database server and all that stuff. So there was big differences from staging to production. In a serverless environment, in a pure serverless environment, there's almost no difference between staging and production, because the changes that are necessary instantly appear. So when you're on staging, you have the equivalent of say one or two servers, but you take the exact same setup, you move it to production, and the minute you need like that third server, you have it. The minute you need that, or like the instant you need that third server, you have it. The instant you need that fourth server, you have it. The instant you need that database to scale, it scales, kind of thing. So you have, in a perfect world, you have the exact same setup. Now, well, we are 99.9% serverless, there are certain technologies that aren't serverless, like Elasticsearch is a big one, where it doesn't have auto managed sharding and scalability and stuff like that. So in our case, for our staging environment, we may have like a small, like a T2 small or a T2 micro instance running our Elasticsearch database. And then in production, we may have like a cluster or like a T2 XL running our Elasticsearch instance, kind of thing. So that's usually the only difference. The only thing I can think of elsewhere is sometimes you'll want your staging server to be gated so the public can't access it. So you'll have some application logic that prevents people from accessing the staging environment. But usually that's not even a big deal anyway, because you just don't care if someone accesses your staging environment.
So what are the steps in terms of setting up your application to deploy to production? How does that differ from the staging setup?
So it really shouldn't. The staging environment, like we talked about last week, is for basic, in our world, is for two purposes. It's for testing new changes, new features, and it's also for where code gets merged. So everyone, as we talked about, has their own environment, their own code repository, and staging is where everyone's changes gets merged into the main code branch and then tested on staging. So when you actually go from staging to production in this setup, all you are doing is pushing the approved merge code to the new environment. And that's really it. That should be the only thing that has to happen, because it's already tested, it's already merged. You just basically then take set approved code and put it into your production environment.
So the merge is actually on staging. The merge was, it could be dozens of developers merging their code into one repository. But once you have the staging repository set up and you sort of have the final version of staging, the merge into production is pretty much just merging that one branch into the master branch and deploying that up, right?
Yep, that's right. That's 100% correct. And then we have, like, again, everything is based on a perfect world. In reality, sometimes bugs make it into production, and so then you have a thing called like a hot fix, where someone realizes what the bug is, they check out the master branch, they make the change on the master branch, and then push the master branch right to production. And so basically you're fixing, it's called a hot fix, and then you kind of reverse merge that hot fix back down to staging. So the next time all the branches gets merged, that hot fix is already on staging and everyone else will get it.
I'm trying to think of what else we can talk about with the production server, because really what we talked about with the staging server and the entire staging setup is sort of wholly applicable to the production environment.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's a couple other things that are AWS specific. So like AWS does a couple things to keep you from shooting yourself in the foot. So it's possible because again, you have infinite scalability with kind of lambdas and things like that. And so it's possible that if you have a bug in your code, in your application code, you could say recursively keep calling a Lambda instance, which you get charged every time you call a Lambda instance. And if you're calling a Lambda instance like 100 times every millisecond, you're going to get a gigantic bill. So in like by default, Amazon restricts and puts limits on certain things. So when you go to production, if you think you're going to touch those limits, you have to remember to email support and be like, hey, can you please remove this limit? You know, one of those things that we ran into is with using their SES, which is their email service. And so we kept hitting their limits on how many emails we could send out because they have sandbox protections in there. So you don't, number one, spam people with an email server. And number two, don't rack up an enormous bill by sending, you know, 1 billion emails in a single day kind of thing. So you're basically like saying, it's okay. We know what we're doing. This is tested. So if we rack up a huge bill, it's on us. So go ahead and remove those protections for our production account.
Talk about what the comparable bill is for a production environment versus a staging environment. I mean, I guess it all depends on usage, but are you talking 10x, 100x, a million X? What are the differences in costs for a
Yeah,
serverless environment?
it's we were just going through this exercise with a client, and they believe that I was doing the calculator. It was for video encoding and video serving, and they thought that I was grossly mistaken. There couldn't possibly be that cheap because they had done the numbers on a traditional environment, and it was like 1000x. Now we're talking about video, which video is kind of an anomaly because it is very expensive to do on your own, and it is very cheap to do if you use Amazon's services. But we're definitely seeing bills that are 100x lower than a traditional environment under any usage. And it's perfect for entrepreneurs, which is our main client base. Like, because no one is going to, I mean, you're not going to have a mass audience right out the gate when you deploy to production, but you have to be prepared for that mass audience. So in a traditional environment, you have to outlay all of the money to have those servers just sitting there waiting for traffic to ramp up. With serverless, you're not paying for anything just to sit around. You're only paying if it gets used. So your bill, I mean, we like when we start with new entrepreneur clients, I basically tell them, don't even worry about paying us for infrastructure for the first year. It's on us. First year's on us. And really, it sounds nice, and it is, but it's like $5 a month. I mean, like, because they're so worried about what it's going to cost, And I'm like, it's not going to be much. I can't tell you how much it's going to be because it's based on usage, but it's not going to be much. And then they get all worried. Well, is it going to be like $1,000 out of nowhere? So we finally just say, like, listen, we'll take the cost for the first year. And then they're kind of like, oh, really? And we're like, yeah. That's how little concerned we are about the cost of a serverless environment.
Talk about, because I remember back in the day when we used to have traditional architecture, there would be actual downtime when you were deploying to production. You'd actually, and that got better as sort of the years went on. And even with sort of a traditional setup on AWS, you have stuff like immutable deploys where you basically spin up a clone of your environment, of your production environment, test it out to make sure that it's set up correctly, and then Amazon will sort of automatically switch to the brand new one, and they'll be with the new code and all the new changes. And for the end user, it'll be like there was no downtime at all.
Yeah, and that's called blue-green deployment. And yeah, you can certainly that was actually a big revolutionary idea when it first came out. Actually,
Yeah, I are there any reasons why a serverless environment should go offline at any time?
actually, it was kind of weird. Like, someone was making the case that it should, and I wasn't really able to follow them. I was trying to read along, where they were like, we have like straggler Lambda instances that we want to make unavailable immediately,
Mhm.
and
Like
during
long running Lambda instances?
something like that. And I really did not understand, and I didn't engage, but it was like during deployment, they want Lambda instances to stop processing and no new Lambda instances to be spun up. So if you're out there and it was probably on Twitter and you wrote that tweet, get a hold of us because I would like to understand the use case because I'm not really sure what it is. But apparently there is a case where you want to turn off your lambdas for a very short amount of time. But I don't fully understand the use case.
One thing that might be different between staging and production is the services that staging uses versus production. I know in some other applications we've used sort of like a dummy mail service like Mailtrap instead of a live email service like SES. So with stuff like that where you have to control the configuration, maybe talk about environment variables and how those work in the different environments.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. So you use the example of in a staging environment, if you're testing stuff against in some staging environments, you'll test against live data. But if you're sending emails, you don't want to send emails live. You want them trapped. You don't want them actually going out to a client from your test environment or staging environment. Same thing with like e-commerce. You don't want to be charged. You want your credit card charged on a staging environment. You just want to make sure that it will actually work. So you can do things like sandbox the payment processor and stuff like that. So you're 100% correct. And one thing we do a lot of is consume a lot of data feeds. And consuming data feeds isn't that bad on a staging environment. But at the same time, if you're doing mass consumptions of large data feeds, you don't want to leave that on at all times on a staging environment because you're going to rack up costs that are just not needed kind of thing.
Yep. And I guess we talked about it a little bit last time too, but the production environment should live in its own account. It should be a wholly separate account for the production environment. When we're talking about costs and billing, it should be entirely separate from staging.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of in our companion episode that we'll work on today is we kind of come up with a scenario where basically every developer has their own environment, and really the only thing you need to do is you can have an array of environments which are just accounts. So you have an array of AWS accounts, and the only thing you as a team need to do is agree upon which one of those is the production account. And really, that's not even that important. Oddly enough, that's not that important. The only reason it's important is because you have to, for that one production account, you'll have to raise or remove the AWS limits. What's actually more important is that as a group, as a team, you decide which one is the staging environment. You can call it whatever you want, but that's where all the code is going to go together. The reason that you need to determine those two things is because by default, everyone has access to their own environment / account. But in order to, merge the code, everyone needs push access to the staging environment because they need to get their code into staging so it can be reviewed. And so the reason that, and then again, one of the reasons why you identify what the production environment is because not everyone will have access into the production environment, but someone on the team will have to be able to push the code from staging to production. So that person will need to be in that group that has access to the production environment. So basically, every developer on the team should be in the group that has access to the staging repository. And really, ideally, only one person in the group should have access to the production repository, and that's simply to push the code.
And would that be a production or project manager role, or would that be a senior developer role? Who's usually in charge of that final push to production?
Yeah, so it's usually one or the other. Typically, it'll be a senior developer or the lead developer, but it could very well be a project manager as well, as long as the project manager's technical. Because what you want the project manager to be able to do, what you want the person pushing the code to be able to do, is to roll back if for whatever reason something goes horribly wrong. You want them to at least have the technical acumen to be able to roll back the stack.
One difference between production and staging that I've seen is in terms of, especially for stuff like HIPAA compliance, you have to be able to have logs from the past. I think it's 2 years for your production environment, but you'd only really need to save like the past week's worth of logs for your staging environment. Are there any differences in terms of the services that are used on production versus the services used on staging? Anything that you would use on production that you don't necessarily need to use on staging, or vice versa?
Um, so yes, like you can do so. For example, like this is a tough one because you probably want it on staging as well. But
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tough because it's so cheap to have it on staging that you
right,
almost
right,
might
right,
as well have it there too. But
right. But
stuff
like,
like error tracking
mm,
or different
yeah,
levels of warnings for, you know, certain pieces of code or whatever. I mean, there are maybe some instances where it would make sense.
and like, well, and AWS has a service now that's available for Lambdas called X-Ray, which provides a look into the performance of your code, bottlenecks, things like
Mhm.
that. But see, that's good to have on staging too, because ideally you'd want to see if there's any bottlenecks before you push to production.
I guess more
Uh,
worthwhile in production because you'd actually have real traffic there. But then I
right,
guess you could
right,
always
right,
stress
right,
test staging, so you'd want to have it there too.
right. Exactly. So it's tough to say, but there's certain instances where yeah, you want something on production that you don't necessarily want to foot the bill for on
Right,
staging, kind of
right.
thing.
Um, yeah, I guess anything else you want to touch on as far as production deploys, production environment goes?
Um, you know, the important thing to think of is like the other thing is in like a traditional environment, like the production environment is pretty fixed. Like it's there.
Right,
It's not going anywhere. In a serverless environment, like I said, you can call the staging and production environments whatever you want. Like all you really have to do if it's a web app is make sure the DNS resolves to the right place. So
right.
you could very easily have something called the production environment, and that is the production environment. But then you could easily create production two, and then just literally change where that DNS points, and you're good to go. So you're no longer kind of like stuck into bad decisions. Like if you've gone off the rails and architected something that is kind of like deviated from best practices, you don't necessarily have to go and unwrap all of that and wrap it back. You can just do it right and then just change the DNS and then you're good.
One thing, talking about sort of legacy architectures versus sort of serverless architectures, it used to be that you would want uh, sort of like a fail-safe setup where you might have an entire environment sitting in a different region that you could flip over to in case there was some sort of catastrophic event in the region that was hosting your primary environment. Or even, I mean, I know at ESPN we actually had physical servers sitting somewhere um, that we could flip over to off of our cloud-based stack in case anything went horribly wrong. But uh, I guess talk about why that's sort of moot with the serverless environment, and especially why that's moot with services like AWS, where you're sort of yeah, you know, tossing it over to them as far as handling sort of a fail-safe architecture where they have sort of availability zones all over the globe.
Yeah, so there's things called availability zones and there's things called regions. And so everything that we're talking about using spans multiple availability zones. And so availability zones are equivalent to data centers. So typically a region will have like 4 availability zones, and there'll be redundancy across availability zones. So if one whole data center, which by the way almost never happens, goes down, your application doesn't miss a beat because everything is automatically routed to another availability zone. In the case that every availability zone goes down, you can have region redundancy. And so you could have because because all of your infrastructure is simply code. um, what you could do this, especially because their AWS's main database offering, DynamoDB, is now they have a global option. So the global option will actually span regions. So I would say the tricky part about multiple region redundancy is migrating your data, keeping your data in sync. That's the only tough part that's left. But if
Mhm.
you use global DynamoDB, even that problem is kind of removed. So in the case like the whole eastern seaboard goes offline, you could have your entire application running in on the West Coast, in a matter of hours, rather than just kind of be screwed. You could literally change the DNS because Route 53, which is their DNS controller, is a global service. It's not tied to any one region. DynamoDB, same thing. You can have global issue or a global instance. And then you're talking about things like Elasticsearch. You'd have to rebuild the index in a new region. Or if you're using a SQL database, you would have to transfer the data to the new region. And usually what you do is, because if it's offline, you can't tap into that now dead Elasticsearch instance. So generally what you have is on your non-core, your non-master data set, you have like a hourly job or every 10 minutes that deltas the changes from one region to the next. And so it keeps it pretty much in sync in case of something that disastrous
Yeah, so
goes wrong.
functionally, even if there is like a
Alien invasion.
9.0 earthquake in the Northern California region, which
Right.
could potentially happen,
Right.
you might have 10 minutes of downtime while everything's sort of
Yeah,
flipping over.
exactly. So yeah, and again, it all goes to your kind of like your tolerance for being offline. So you got to imagine. So in a situation where an event like that could take 4 data centers offline, you're right. It would be like a 9.0 earthquake, which like split off California from the United States.
It'd be like
And so
if San Andreas, the movie, actually happened.
right. So if you got to think like CNN would want like 10 minutes of downtime because everyone's going to be going to CNN to see what happened. So they're going to do everything they can to keep their region clusters in sync. So they're going to have very little downtime. If you're like, if you're like Shoe Dazzle, where you can rent new shoes, like people aren't really going to be like, oh, I can't rent new shoes. Well, this horrible tragedy is currently in progress.
Yeah, they probably got bigger things on their mind.
Right.
They're going to CNN to look at like the most recent news.
Right. So they're not going to have to worry about having, they'd be just fine with 4 hours of downtime,
right.
kind of thing. So you kind of have to, it's a cost analysis because there is cost involved in keeping things in sync. But it's not like it used to be where you would actually have to create what's called a mirror instance of your entire environment actually up and running. It's called a hot backup.
Yeah, exactly.
You actually have to have a hot backup of everything you need, which again, that literally in a traditional environment, that literally doubles your cost.
Doubles. Yeah.
Where in the new environment of serverless, it be like increases your cost by, like 0.4x or something like that. It's not a big deal. And it's mainly development costs in order to keep the data in sync. It's not really having standby infrastructure.
I was going to say, and it's way more difficult to flip over to a hot environment as opposed to these tools that AWS provides.
Exactly. And any little change you make to the non-hot backup, the live version, you have to remember to make to the hot backup. So not only is it double the cost for infrastructure, it's double the cost for any infrastructure changes in terms of the labor that goes involved in that.
And it's not even foolproof, as we've sort of seen in the past. We've had experiences where the hot backup didn't come online right away.
Right.
And so it's any final thoughts on the production environment, deploying to production, anything at all to do with production?
No, and just to reiterate, we talked about last week about the tagging, which again makes it very easy to just roll back in the case of anything going horribly wrong. Again, your production environment is going to be almost identical to your staging. So if you test it on staging, the chances are very slim. But I mean, like a rare instance where someone leaves in code that's like, if staging environment do this and forgets to put in a case for like production environment or something really strange like that. And you want to roll it back really quickly, you just go back to the last tag that was on production and you're all good to go.
I'm trying to look up now because I was curious to see when an entire region has gone offline. And I remember there was a bug where it took one of the regions down, and I can't remember what that was. But in terms of like environmental catastrophes, it looks like it's only gone down once because of an electrical storm. The U.S. East region went down at some point in 2012.
Huh. I don't remember that.
Yeah, exactly. It just sort of goes to show. I mean, I guess it's nice to have. It's a nice security blanket, all this stuff, but you like maybe once or twice in your lifetime, you'll actually have to put it into effect. So I guess that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. Make sure to tune in next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the next episode. Hop on our Facebook page and enter the Country Shore giveaway. Country Shore is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. You can visit them at countryshoreoutfitters.com. And while you're on our Facebook page, answer this week's question of the week, which is, have you ever played Pokemon Go? And I guess if you've never even heard of Pokemon Go, go ahead and answer that question of the week and just give us a solid no. I'm wondering, like, is Pokemon Go outside of the tech industry that popular with the rest of the world, or is it sort of like a niche game that only nerds enjoy?
I don't think it's a niche game. I really don't. I think it's. I mean, man, I remember when it first came out, you'd see people like running around, and you'd be like, "What are they doing?"
Yeah, and I did send you that thing. There's an actual Pokemon Go event in Chicago where I guess you sort of hang out and they release like a bunch of special Pokemons and you can just, chill with people who enjoy Pokemon Go as much as you do. And the tickets sold out, I think, in half an hour. They were $20 and now they're going for $500 on eBay. So I guess there's a lot of Pokemon goers, Pokemon Go daddies.
Yep.
What are they called?
Pokemon goers.
Yeah, Pokemon Goman. So hop on our Facebook page, answer our question of the week. You can check out the blog posters episode at gunnertech.com. The podcast will be available on iTunes. Our ebooks are available on Amazon, iBooks, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and anywhere else ebooks are sold. Make sure to tune in next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the next episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. I'm Derry. That's Cody. We'll see you next week.